We've had lots more proof this week that Britain's housing market is screwed. The Guardian had this report. 1 in 3 of England's university starters may live at home this year. Now, that story is based on a survey of current sixth formers by UCL, and the 1 in 3 figure is up from 20% in 2019. The researchers warn it could limit career choices if people only feel they can afford to go to universities near their family homes. Bloomberg also had a related story. So they write, UK young adults give up on property to live with parents later in life. The Bloomberg story is based on data from the census and from the property website Zoopla. So they're finding that lots more people are living with their parents for a much longer period of time, and people who are millennials and Gen Z are just giving up on the hope of ever owning a home. Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't appear to have got the memo, though. I was on his show on Thursday night. I also think a mistake that you guys make is thinking that if it's in the private sector, that means that there must have been some risk involved. Now, I was counting up how much me and my 2 flatmates pay our landlord a year, and it is about 33 grand a year. Now, all you need to do in this country at the moment to earn over 100 grand is own 3 ex-council flats in a major city. Now, that is someone, in my mind, who is getting paid too much money but not doing any work. And this focus on the civil service I find bizarre.
You've got to have saved quite a lot of money, though.
Paying rent is basically a tax because I've got no choice but to pay it.
No, because you've got the choice of getting a mortgage instead, and that the person who has bought the properties has invested capital to buy it, and capital must have a return.
I am what's called a captive market there.
Well, I think we're going to have to finish on that note. Next time, we'll have to get Martin Lewis on and have financial advice for you.
I'm not sure how much financial advice from Martin Lewis would help me get the 100 grand or so that I think you need for a deposit for a flat in London these days. That was the end of a much longer debate about the civil service. So that was GB News. They like to sort of say the civil service is too big, they're getting paid too much, this is the real enemy. I was sort of pointing out in the conversation that, one, the reason they have to pay top civil servants a lot of money is because the comparative wages in the private sector are very high for sort of people in management, and also that this focus on the public sector is really just to distract from people who are making too much money for not doing very much in the private sector, i.e., e.g., my landlord.
It's quite uncomfortable actually looking at those stats about living with your parents, because I live with my parents. I mean, I'm way into my 30s now, and I've lived with my parents for an uncomfortable amount of time. But yeah, it's clear he doesn't really know what the reality is. You know, people can't afford mortgages. You can't afford to save for a deposit because you're paying all your money on rent.
Your book about class structure, as I say, what I know from it is from your fantastic interview with Aaron Bastani. But in that conversation, you talked a lot about class structure and sort of people's politics being based on their class position and what material interest they might have and sort of how that affects their consciousness, I suppose, when approaching the world. I mean, this phenomenon, which I think is much wider than in the UK as well, with young people sort of giving up on owning a home. How do you think that will affect class and politics in Britain?
So in the book, I sort of argue that when we talk about politics and housing and class, we sometimes get confused because the experience of renting, the experience of living with your parents can be so all-consuming and awful that we sort of think, well, it's between renters on the one hand and owner-occupiers or homeowners on the other. And people tend to sort of imply that, you know, if you own your own house, you're middle class, and if you rent, you're working class. That's not how it works. But what housing has done is it's really complicated the class structure, and it's complicated how politics relates to class. So if you think back to Marx when he says, you know, the working class have nothing to lose but their chains, you know, this was because back in the day, the working class didn't actually used to own property. But after things like right to buy that Thatcher brought in the 70s and 80s, we had a situation where huge swathes of the working class population in the UK and the low middle classes owned their own property. And that's still the case today. I think it's 65% of the UK are owner occupiers, so it's still a majority tenure. And what I argue in the book is that it doesn't change people's class to own their house, but what it does, it can give you contradictory sort of class interests. So it can bring different parts of the working class into conflict with other fractions. So, for example, you could oppose social housing being built in your area because you don't want your house price to go down in value. And equally, for the young graduates who have been priced out of the housing market, their politics are largely defined by, you know, the anger and frustration of having to rent.